Subscribe fuckers. Now let's get in the video. Alaska, a land of breathtaking landscapes, towering mountains, and endless frozen tundra. A place where isolation isn't just a state of mind, it's a way of life. For many, Alaska represents freedom, a final frontier untouched by the chaos of modern civilization. But beneath the icy beauty lies a darker truth, a history stained with violence, lawlessness, and tragedy. From the brutality of colonization to the crimes of today, murders, disappearances, and serial killers who thrived in the vast wilderness. Alaska has long been a place where violence lurks in the shadows. But why? What makes this state one of the most remote in America, one of the most violent? In this deep dive, we'll explore Alaska's bloody past, from indigenous conflicts to gold rush crime, from systemic violence against native communities to the chilling rise of modern killers. Long before Alaska became a state, before the first Europeans set foot on its shores, it was home to thriving indigenous cultures. The Inuit, the Aleut, the Tlingit, and many others had lived here for thousands of years, surviving in one of the harshest climates on Earth. But the arrival of outsiders would bring devastating consequences. It began with the Russians in the mid-1700s. Led by explorers like Vitus Bering, they came in search of wealth, specifically sea otter pelts, which were worth a fortune in China's fur trade. And they were willing to kill for them. The Russian fur traders, known as Promyshleniki, were ruthless. They enslaved Aleut and Alutiiq people, forcing them to hunt for furs under brutal conditions. Those who resisted were slaughtered. Entire villages were wiped out. One of the worst atrocities took place on Kodiak Island, where the Russians massacred hundreds of native men, women, and children. Survivors were forced into servitude, their culture and way of life systematically erased. And when Alaska was sold to the United States in 1867, things didn't get much better. Under American rule, indigenous people faced forced assimilation. Their languages were banned, their traditions outlawed. The government and missionaries placed native children in boarding schools, where they were beaten for speaking their own language, subjected to horrific abuse, and in many cases never seen again. Alaska's history of violence didn't start with crime. It started with conquest. But as settlers pushed further into the wilderness, violence took on a new form: lawlessness. By the late 1800s, the discovery of gold in Alaska brought a wave of fortune seekers. The gold rush promised wealth beyond imagination, but in reality, it unleashed chaos. Boomtowns like Skagway and Nome sprang up overnight. Lawless settlements filled with saloons, gambling dens, and brothels. Where there's gold, there's greed. And where there's greed, there's bloodshed. One of the most notorious figures of this era was Soapy Smith, a conman and crime boss who ruled Skagway with an iron fist. His gang ran elaborate scams, rigged card games, and weren't afraid to kill anyone who stood in their way. Soapy met his end in 1898, gunned down in a shootout on Juneau Wharf. Yet, even after his death, Alaska remained wild. The remoteness of the land made it a haven for criminals, outlaws, and those looking to disappear. But the violence wasn't just among settlers. The U.S. government's treatment of indigenous people continued to take a deadly toll. For much of the 20th century, the U.S. government's policies toward Alaska natives remained brutal. Boarding schools, land theft, forced sterilization of indigenous women. These policies weren't just acts of cultural erasure, they were acts of violence. And while the world changed, Alaska remained a place where the marginalized were often ignored, especially when they went missing. Which brings us to today. Alaska has the highest violent crime rate per capita in the United States. The numbers are staggering. The state consistently ranks first in rape and sexual assault rates, often 3 times the national average. The rate of missing and murdered indigenous women, MMIW, is among the highest in the country. And with so much wilderness, many crimes remain unsolved. Then there are the killers who made Alaska their hunting ground. Robert Hansen, the so-called Butcher Baker, kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 17 women in the 1970s and 80s, releasing them into the wilderness like prey before hunting them down. Joshua Wade, a cold-blooded killer who taunted authorities, murdering at least 3 people in Anchorage. and many more whose crimes have never been solved. What makes Alaska a breeding ground for such violence? Alaska's remoteness is a killer's best friend. Thousands of miles of untouched wilderness. Countless lakes, rivers, and forests where bodies may never be found. Small towns with no full-time police officers. And in many native villages, law enforcement is non-existent. The nearest troopers are sometimes hundreds of miles away. In a place where winter lasts half the year and daylight can disappear entirely, justice often comes too late, if at all. But there is hope. Indigenous-led organizations are fighting back, demanding justice for missing and murdered Native women. New forensic technologies and cold case units are reopening investigations once thought unsolvable. And communities are stepping up, determined to break the cycle of violence. Alaska's history is written in blood. From the atrocities of colonization to the crimes of today, violence has long haunted this land. But acknowledging the past is the first step toward change. And maybe, just maybe, Alaska's future won't be as dark as its history. The mind control weather machine conspiracy. Secret underground bases, military installations hidden in the ice. Nuclear testing and Cold War experiments. What's still classified? MKUltra connections? CIA experiments on the remote population. The disappearance of Portlock, a town that fled in fear. Other abandoned towns with eerie pasts. What drove people away? Violence? The supernatural. Over 16,000 people missing since 1988. Where do they go? The Alaska Triangle, more vanishings than the Bermuda Triangle. The strange case of Thomas Childs Jr., he vanished without a trace. The Nome disappearances, so many missing, the FBI got involved. Robert Hansen, the butcher baker, the hunter who killed women. Joshua Wade, the remorseless murderer. Other cases of serial killers who thrived in the wilderness. What makes Alaska a breeding ground for murder? The Kushtaka, shape-shifting otter demons. Kalapalik, the sea creature that steals children. Bigfoot in Alaska? Reports of giant, hairy creatures. Are these legends warnings? Or something real? The wilderness swallows bodies, making crime easy. The dark winter's effect on the human mind. Do the mountains, lakes, and tundras keep dark secrets? One's secrets will never be uncovered. But the more we dig, the more we realize. Alaska is far more than meets the eye. What role do gangs play in this violence? The impact of drugs, human trafficking, and organized crime. Gangs began forming in the 1970s and 1980s, mostly tied to drugs. Influence of LA and Chicago-based gangs reaching up to Alaska. Early prison gangs and smuggling networks. The rise of native Alaskan gang culture. The 1488th white supremacist prison gang, known for violent crimes. The Crips and Bloods, active in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. The Native Brotherhood and Native Sisterhood, prison gangs tied to indigenous groups. Hell's Angels and outlaw motorcycle clubs, running drugs, guns trafficking. Cartel connections. How Mexico's cartels use Alaska as a smuggling route. Meth, heroin, and fentanyl, the lifeline of gang operations. How drugs get into Alaska, West Coast, Canada, and Russia. Anchorage as a drug trafficking hub. How gangs use Alaska's remote villages as drug distribution points. How gang wars play out in Alaska's cities. Murders and shootings. High-profile gang killings. Human trafficking and sex trade, a growing problem in Alaska. Stories from ex-gang members and law enforcement. The difficulty of policing in a massive, remote state. FBI and DEA task forces targeting gangs. Are gangs growing despite crackdowns? The connection between gangs and missing indigenous women. Will things get worse? Or is there a way to stop gang growth? Community efforts to pull youth out of gang life. The role of economic hardship in gang recruitment. Alaska's gang scene is brutal, but rarely talked about. The wilderness hides more than just bodies. It hides an entire underworld of crime. What can be done to stop it? Or is it too late? A new bill has been introduced in the Alaska legislature aiming to establish a state-managed alternative to the federal flood insurance program. This initiative seeks to provide more tailored and potentially cost-effective coverage options for Alaskans, particularly in areas prone to flooding due to glacial activity and other unique environmental factors. Members of the Anchorage Assembly have proposed a temporary suspension of certain design regulations for apartment buildings. The move is intended to encourage development and address housing shortages in the city. If approved, the pause would allow developers more flexibility in design, potentially accelerating construction projects. Recent reforms to Alaska's college scholarship program have led to a notable increase in student participation. The legislature's decision to raise award amounts has made higher education more accessible for high-performing graduates across the state. This positive trend reflects the program's success in encouraging academic achievement and supporting Alaskan students in pursuing post-secondary education. Alaska is one of the most breathtaking places on Earth, known for wild landscapes, adventure, and resilience. Despite its challenges, Alaska has a deep sense of community and culture. Northern Lights, one of the best places to witness the aurora borealis. National parks home to Denali, Kenai Fjords, Glacier Bay, and more. Wildlife, bears, wolves, moose, eagles, and marine life. Glaciers and mountains, some of the most stunning landscapes on Earth. Native Alaskan cultures, rich traditions of the Inupiat, Yupik, Tlingit, and others. Pioneering spirit, people who thrive in extreme conditions. Tight-knit communities, small towns where everyone helps each other. Famous Alaskans, from athletes to artists and politicians. Dog sledding and the Iditarod, the legendary 1,000-mile race. Hiking and camping, endless wilderness for exploration. Fishing and hunting, some of the best in the world. Extreme sports, ice climbing, heli-skiing, and Arctic expeditions. Endless daylight in summer, 24-hour sun in parts of Alaska. Deep winter darkness, a mystical experience unlike anywhere else. Alaska's unique weather and seasonal extremes. Oil and gas industry, a major part of Alaska's economy. Fishing industry, Alaska supplies much of the world's seafood. Tourism, millions visit each year for cruises and adventure. Renewable energy projects, the future of clean energy in Alaska. Self-sufficiency and survival skills, living off the land. The joy of solitude and peaceful nature. Small-town charm with a big heart. People who visit Alaska often never want to leave. Despite its challenges, Alaska is a place of beauty, adventure, and resilience. The people who live here are strong, independent, and deeply connected to nature. Whether for a visit or a lifetime, Alaska leaves a mark on the soul. Things to help the city. Invest in law enforcement and tribal policing, more resources for rural areas. Combat human trafficking and violence against Indigenous women, address the crisis. Prison and rehabilitation reform. Stop the cycle of crime and repeat offenders. Diversify beyond oil and gas, invest in renewable energy, tech, and local businesses. Expand tourism year-round. Make Alaska a travel destination beyond summer. Support Alaskan small businesses. Incentives for entrepreneurs. Improve education and job training. Give Alaskans the tools for success. Expand road access to remote communities. Reduce isolation and lower costs. Upgrade internet and technology. Provide reliable service for rural towns. Improve public transport in cities. Make it easier to live without a car. Invest in clean energy and sustainability. Protect Alaska's environment. Increase medical facilities and telemedicine. Make healthcare accessible for all. Better mental health and addiction services. Address high suicide and substance abuse rates. Encourage more healthcare workers to move to Alaska. Offer incentives. Strengthen native land rights and cultural preservation. Protect traditions. Expand economic opportunities in rural villages. Jobs beyond fishing and tourism. Improve education for Native youth. Address dropout rates and increase scholarships. Improve schools and after-school programs. Give kids more opportunities. Make living costs more affordable, reduce food and housing prices. Enhance community services and events. Make small towns more vibrant. Alaska has the potential to be one of the best places to live in the U.S. With smart investments, stronger communities, and innovative solutions, it can thrive. The future of Alaska is in the hands of its people. What happens next is up to them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into the past. Let me know in the comments what city or topic you'd like me to cover next. Until next time, stay curious and stay strong. Make sure you subscribe.